UtilityMuffinLabs.com is the source for podcasts like 25 Years of Vampire the Masquerade, the Nerdwords podcast, and the Playing Hooky podcast, to name a few. We offer gaming, music, and pop culture content, as well as graphic and audio design, voice talent, and more. Go to UtilityMuffinLabs.com to commission us for your audio needs, digital artwork, and advertising opportunities. UtilityMuffinLabs.com, consistently rated adequate. Welcome to the Playing Hooky podcast with your hosts Rachel and Nathan, brought to you by UtilityMuffinLabs.com, consistently rated adequate.
Welcome everybody to the Playing Hooky podcast. My name is Rachel.
And I'm Nathan.
Thank you for joining us. We are just 1 or 2 days late maybe on getting this posted because we have been some sick mofos. I caught a little bug, added into my regular fall-time allergies and a sinus infection. And Nate decided he was going to get all splotchy, and he got super splashy. Long story short, we've now changed all of our laundry detergent, and everything has been washed because apparently the delicate flower over here,
sad boy,
has developed an allergy to detergents and soaps. Yeah, which is, is it like you do?
I'm on steroids now.
Which is a delight.
You've undersold your sickness. She says she caught a little bug, but
basically I got real sick. I had a fever, had some kind of virus, and then my body's like, oh, how about this? Guess what? We're just going to take all of your immune system and then hold on to all the bacteria in your nose and your sinuses, and then I got a sinus infection. So it was unpleasant, and I was sick for like about 7 full days. I'm
trying to think of like within the context of our last recording where we kind of fell into that, because I've been on steroids for like 9 days now. So
I think our last recording must have been a day or two before I got sick. Mm-hmm. And that was, or I don't know.
Or like the Wednesday before, and I think maybe you were starting to get a little sick that day we recorded.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Something. But it was pretty bad, and so I caught some kind of bug, some kind of virus or something. I don't know, just out and about like you do. Not the flu, maybe the flu, but probably not the flu. But everyone should get their flu shot, because I heard a story on the radio today about like how important it is to get your flu shot, and there was a doctor who was on there talking, and he's like, yeah, last year I had a patient who was like a young father, and guy in his early 30s, and he didn't have a flu shot, and he got the flu, and he was in the hospital for 2 months and had to be on oxygen for a full year after that from the flu. Now, not to say that you necessarily won't catch the flu or get sick at all if you get a flu shot, because that's just not how that works, but you can definitely probably lower your risk of catching the friggin' flu that's going to put you in the hospital for 2 months. It's not just for old people. Everyone can get the flu and the flu shot, as it turns out. Also, so that's my PSA for the fall.
If you're vaping, stop.
Shut up until we start talking. What are you talking about? So we, in being sick, we didn't go out and do a lot of research on things. We just kind of pulled from what we had around the house and things that we knew that we liked. And coincidentally, we kind of came up with a theme for today. We've been working on reading some books, but when I'm like laying on the couch with a 100-degree fever, I'm not really super interested in reading a book. I'm more interested in sleeping. So that was kind of my life for the past 2 weeks, and then catching up on work and on things around the house. So we decided it would be easier just to kind of watch some movies. One movie that I really like a lot, that I'd seen a long time ago and I've seen it many times, was The Aviator. And it was like one movie that Nate surprisingly had never seen. So Leonardo DiCaprio, directed by Martin Scorsese. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Howard Hughes. And I was like, Nate, we got to watch this. And we found a copy pretty easily at Half Price Books. And then Nate was like, I can't believe you've never seen Wolf of Wall Street. And I was like, no, of course not. I've not seen Wolf of Wall Street because I was in school for a million years and didn't basically watch any movies that came out between like 2012 and 2016. And so we watched that. So it's like a DiCaprio, Scorsese, like combo punch. Mm-hmm. So why don't you really briefly kind of talk through what The Wolf of Wall Street is about? Because that was a movie you brought to the table that I watched.
The beginning of the story with The Aviator, I'd never even heard of The Aviator. I didn't even
really?
No,
I didn't know that.
I didn't even know that was a movie. In retrospect, I had heard of it, but Leonardo DiCaprio did another movie, I think it's called The Great Gatsby, that kind of takes place...
Yeah, it's like, similar time frame.
Right.
1920s.
I don't know if it actually is or not, but I confused the two because like the Aviator to me was a story about a guy who like invented airplanes. And that's not true, but that's basically what I thought it was. So I never bothered to watch either of them because neither of them really interested me at all. Now, obviously, they're completely different movies.
Actually, The Great Gatsby came out quite a long time after The Aviator. The Aviator was like 2004. Great Gatsby was 2013.
So I would say probably in 2004, when The Aviator came out, it was just like kind of one of those, kind of like perceived to be pretentious films. I didn't even know Martin Scorsese directed it. Like, it just completely was under my radar. Right. And in retrospect, like, I understand why it wasn't on my radar. Like, it's like a biopic about some guy in the 20s who...
Howard Hughes. Yeah.
Right, who did some stuff with airplanes, right? So, like, why would I care to watch that? But anyways, you were like, oh, yeah, I got this Leonardo DiCaprio movie that you'd like. You should watch this. And I was like, oh, well, let's watch Wolf of Wall Street. And it was at that point that I was like, oh, my God, Martin Scorsese directed both of them. This is a coup.
Yeah.
We've struck gold.
Yeah.
So,
we managed to find two Scorsese movies with DiCaprio in them that neither of us had seen respectively. It was kind of a perfect storm.
Yeah. So, anyways, Wolf of Wall Street was a movie I don't believe I saw it in the theater when it came out in theater. I don't think I was seeing a lot of movies at that time. I was just like really busy with work. But when it came out on Blu-ray, I immediately went and picked it up. That's kind of like how I operated at the time. I was just like, the theater, that's for people. I'll just go.
I don't want to go to where people are.
I don't want to go to where people are. So I would just wait until the movie came out and I would rent it or buy it. And I bought it. And it's a movie that you need 3 hours. Oh. But to me, it is a properly paced 3 hour movie. Like, for me, there's no point in the movie where I'm like, oh man, I'm bored. It's about a guy who breaks into sort of like the Wall Street, hence the Wolf of Wall Street, like in the late 80s, early 90s, after the market crash, and just sort of like lives this life of excess and, kind of some tomfoolery. And
does maybe some unscrupulous illegal things to buy and sell stocks and leading his company.
It is I would say it's very consistent with a lot of Martin Scorsese's earlier films, where it is narrated by the main character, and that main character is he's a bit dubious.
Yes, that's a good way of dubious. Yes, unscrupulous morals. Something. Yeah. Well, so I agree. So this is based off of a real guy whose name is Jordan Belfort. Jordan Belfort, who actually wrote the book, The Wolf of Wall Street. So it's based on his life. And he ended up, I won't spoil the movie for you if you've not seen it, but basically he ended up doing some bad things and having to suffer the repercussions for those bad things. But yeah, I'll agree with Nate. Like, it's very entertaining. And for as long as it's the most well-paced movie for its length. So one movie that we kind of have talked about off and on is Gangs of New York. And I joke around that is like one of the only movies I walked out of, and it wasn't because it was a bad movie. It's because like I had to catch a bus to go home or I was going to get in trouble. And I think that is a movie, also a Scorsese movie, right?
Yeah.
Also with Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah. See what's happening here? That I think was very long and not as well paced. Because there are some parts in that movie where it's like it dips down. You're like, oh, okay, when is we're going to get to the point?
I love the Gangs of New York movie, but I will agree with you that I find it to be one of the more poorly paced Scorsese films that I've seen. And I haven't seen any, like all of Scorsese's films. I was looking before we started the podcast, and there's like 3 or 4 in his catalog of movies he's directed that I haven't seen. Some of them are documentaries. Some of them are like, he's like really into the Rolling Stones, and he's got like a Rolling Stones movie. But there's only a couple of other ones that I haven't seen that are like true films.
Sure.
And I love it, but I do think it is terribly paced. It's one of those movies
Gangs of New York.
Yeah, Gangs of New York. I'm sorry. It's one of those movies where I'm not going to suggest Like, I wouldn't suggest it lightly. I'd be like, hey, are you into these types of movies and old crime films?
Yeah, old crime films, grittier stuff, American history.
Right.
Yeah.
I would qualify it before my excitement wouldn't get the better of me. Whereas with The Wolf of Wall Street, when this movie came out and I saw it, immediately I was like, oh, this movie's great. And the reason why I thought this movie was great was because I'm really into dark comedies. We've had conversations similar to this. We had one in the last podcast where we talked about Full Metal Jacket. And, you're like these movies aren't like making me like fond of these characters. And, I was like, yeah, they're not really supposed to make you feel good about these characters, but I think it's something more than that. And I think The Wolf of Wall Street is indicative of Scorsese's tendency to direct movies about people who, regardless of whether or not it is in their best interest, are compelled beyond rationale to maintain what they believe is absolute control. And even as things are spiraling out, their tendency is to, rationalize their lack of control by trying to like desperately grab for it. So this movie I feel is an example of that. I feel Casino, Goodfellas is an example of that. We talked a little bit about Boardwalk Empire, and I felt like that one was kind of consistent.
Aviator kind of can fit into that that idea too, where you've got this main character who like you can't really you root for, but you can't relate to,
right? And
then you're kind of like they're given a point towards the end of the story where there's an opportunity for redemption, but Scorsese's not necessarily leading you to that redemption. It's kind of like. Right. And now the film is over and the characters are going to do what they're going to do. And there's an opportunity for them to change and become better people overall. But that's not the story I'm telling.
And I'd like to get your opinions about Wolf of Wall Street a little bit more. But I think the key element for me when I watch these movies that's different from The Aviator to The Wolf of Wall Street is in the narration. A lot of these movies are either like narrated in such a way or are presented in such a way. So like Taxi Driver is another good example. Raging Bull is another good example, where these are movies where you have characters that are kind of like slimy and maybe slightly irredeemable. But in a movie like The Wolf of Wall Street, that character is narrating their own terrible lives, right? They're sort of like walking you through like, yep, here's what I did. Sorry. And I feel like that's an element designed to humanize those characters. Whereas with The Aviator, I don't think that Howard Hughes didn't really need humanizing because his illness was apparent. And like we as observers were probably already sympathetic because we knew that his actions and his compulsions were perhaps beyond his ability to control.
Or really understand, maybe.
Right. And definitely at that time, before we even knew what obsessive compulsive disorder was.
If Howard Hughes hadn't been rich, he would have gone to a sanatorium probably.
Yeah. Right, for sure. They would have just chalked him up to, well, Howard can't function. Let's put him somewhere.
Or he would have been homeless or something, right? Yeah. So you wanted to kind of know my impression of Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
So first of all, I think it's an interesting thing you bring up about the narration. I didn't really get that as like a way to compare and contrast them, but that's interesting. So that's, if you listeners watch these two movies, that's maybe something to pay attention to, is like how the narration maybe does give you insight so that you can kind of start to understand the motivations of these characters who are doing sort of unjustifiably kind of gross things. And so Wolf of Wall Street, what I'll say to get back to the initial point about the time of the movie. It is like a long movie. It's like 3 hours. And I didn't realize how long it was until at one point, 40 minutes into the movie, I got a phone call from a friend that I really wanted to talk to. So we paused it and I talked to her for like 15 minutes. And then we go to start the movie again. I'm like, oh my God, it's 40 minutes of 3 hours. Like it's so much more movie to go. But I have to agree with Nate 100%. I don't think there's one piece of that whole long ass movie that needs to be cut. It's all integral to the story. It's all enjoyable to watch. There was never a part of the movie where I was bored with the story. I was tracking the whole time, like, okay, understanding what I was being set up for, what was coming next, the path that they were leading me down. But I wasn't like able to kind of see like, okay, this is definitely where it's headed and get bored by doing that. So I think it was an incredibly well-paced movie. And even though it was long, I didn't feel like 3 hours, only it did because we had to stop and go pee and stop and take a phone call and things like that. Like life got in the way of watching it the full 3 hours all at once. But I did like it. I thought it was really good. We watched Aviator first, and then a few days later over the weekend, we watched Wolf of Wall Street. And first of all, I'd recommend watching Wolf of Wall Street. Definitely not PG. So I wouldn't recommend watching it with like anyone who wasn't an older teenager. Like, just for example, at one point in the movie, the gentleman that Leonardo DiCaprio is playing is at a dominatrix and has a candle in his ass. And I don't know for sure that the candle was actually in his ass, but he's got some strong butt muscles if not, because it looked like it was down there pretty deep. Or they did some candle butt CGI.
It's the first time that I've ever watched a movie with you where you asked me a question in all seriousness that went like this. Is he blowing cocaine into her ass or... And I was like, yeah, I think so. I mean, I like literally there's things happening in the movie where I'm like,
there was like, one part where I was like, is he blowing cocaine into her butthole or is he sucking it out? Like, so that's a question I legitimately had to ask. Like, almost in a very scientific way. Like, I'm trying to understand what I'm seeing here. So yeah, if that's not a thing that you want to see, might not be the movie for you. Probably don't want to watch it with your parents.
No, definitely. Well, I mean,
depending on your relationship with your parents and how cool your parents are. But anyway, so good movie. I would recommend anyone watch it who likes Scorsese, enjoys DiCaprio. But one thing I will say is something I never thought I would say when I was a preteen or a teenager. In love with Leonardo DiCaprio, circa Romeo and Juliet in the Titanic. Yes, I was one of those. He was like, he was beautiful. I think I'm all DiCaprio'd out because we watched The Aviator, not a short movie, starring DiCaprio, and then Wolf of Wall Street, a very long movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. So I need like a Leonardo DiCaprio palate cleanser, only because it was DiCaprio, which, great, but I just need a little bit of a break because I don't want to like I don't want to overdose on my DiCaprio. Yeah. I want to still like appreciate it. I want to still get those like, I don't want to have diminishing returns on Leo. He's such a good actor, right?
It's weird kind of how he sort of jumped up into like, my top 5 favorite actors. And I feel like he did it by just being in movies.
Right.
And you're like, oh shit, he's in that movie
He's
too?
in every movie. Well, he's in a lot of movies, but he always plays like kind of bigger roles or pivotal roles in movies. Like, and I think another thing is we saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood about a month or so ago, like August, right?
Yeah, I think early August or late July, whatever.
And he plays a leading role in that alongside Brad Pitt. And
he's amazing.
He's amazing in that. Like I think he deserves to be nominated for something. That's the thing too. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Leonardo DiCaprio, in almost every movie he's in, he's amazing and gives an award-worthy performance, in my opinion. And the fact that it took so long for him to win an Oscar is kind of amazing. And I was like, I knew he got nominated for Best Actor for Aviator, and I was like, Nate, you got to watch this movie. Like, it's an incredible performance by him. Like, I don't know if it's his best performance ever. He's probably Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one of his best. But
that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah, but for his age, when he made Aviator, I think he was still probably in his early 30s. I don't know exactly. I know he's a little bit older than me, but it was an amazing performance that he did. Like, Howard Hughes had some wiggy behavior, and it was a pretty amazing performance without making his neuroses or his his OCD seem comical. Like, he actually made it seem really like sad and
he's like 10 years older than you, I think.
10 years. So he's like in his late 40s, mid 40s.
74 when he was born.
Oh, okay. So he's 45. But anyway, like, I looked it up. I'm like, he had to have been nominated for this, and he was nominated for Best Actor for Aviator, and he lost to, I think, Jamie Foxx for Ray.
What's the movie that with the bear where he won?
Revenant.
Okay, because I haven't seen that either.
We got to watch it.
Yeah.
And actually, like, that's the thing. It's like, I don't even think that's one of his best movies. It's definitely not one of his best movies. It's a good movie.
I've seen the bear attack scene, but I've never seen the whole movie. You know what I mean? Like, so, like, I know his acting is, like, pretty damn good in that movie. But that's not the point. Like, when we were watching this movie, that was one of the selling points. You were like, oh my God, he's so great in this movie. He acts so well.
Yeah.
And in my head, it was kind of like, well, I've already seen him in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And that's the thing about Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's something that never occurred to me. I never realized it. I never really even thought about it. But it's like every movie I've seen him in, like he's really incredibly good.
Yeah.
And every movie he comes out with, he's better than he was in the last one. And it's weird because I think one of the movies he's least compelling in is that Christopher Nolan movie, Inception.
Okay.
Inception's awesome. It's a great movie. But like I never found him to be particularly compelling in it. And that's why it's so strange and pervasive. Because he can be in a movie that's an ensemble film and his acting just falls into line with the cast. Also,
I think this is also maybe a credit to his acting, and maybe this is the point you're driving home and I'm missing it. But Inception, the idea and concept and visuals of that movie, almost the concept of the movie is the star of the movie.
Right.
So the fact that he was able to act in an ensemble cast and not overshadow the really cool concept of that movie is more to his credit as him being an amazing actor.
Right. And it's, I mean, looking just how I just referenced it, right? I was like, that Christopher Nolan movie, right? That's how I thought of it. I didn't think that Leonardo DiCaprio movie, and the same thing with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't think of that as that's a Tarantino film, right? That's how I think of it. But he's in it and he's amazing. And he's amazing because he does have a lot of emotional range, but he acts as a character. Mm-hmm. Like I can tell there's more about that character that's happening that I don't know about.
Right.
And the same thing with this movie with
Aviator?
With
Inception.
the Aviator.
Aviator, sorry. No, it's
with
okay.
The Aviator, there's a lot more going on with that character and his obsession and the quirks of that character. You know, he's not really super like high intensity in that movie, like in a bombastic yelling sort of way, the way that he is in Wolf of Wall Street.
Right.
But there's obsession with that character. Mm-hmm. You can tell that there's things that character's compelled to do. And that character's searching for ways to hold on to control. Mm-hmm. And, keep a grasp on things.
Right.
Even though everything's playing against them.
Absolutely. And there's another thing, kind of, we're talking about this, and as you're talking, I'm listening, but I'm also thinking back of like, what are some other Leonardo DiCaprio movies where I feel like both me, but also just generally like the world, the audience that is the world was like, wow. And there's a thing that happened in Wolf of Wall Street. Basically, the character takes some very old drugs that are... The potency is still very high, but because of the age of these quaaludes, like the onset of action of the drug is delayed. The lemon scene is delayed. And so he's like, oh, nothing's happening here. And like they ended up taking like a lot. And as a result of that, he becomes kind of paralyzed, but he's still totally mentally with it, but sort of. Anyway, he becomes like basically paralyzed across his whole body and has very like imprecise and slow motor function. And there's a scene where he's trying to get into his car while this is happening to him. And it's so amusing. It's funny, but it's also like you're watching it like, is he going to be able to get into this car? And it's like the physicality of it, like never mind having dynamic range and emotions and being able to cry and being able to emote these different things. But the physical acting of this was like beautiful to watch. Right. It was amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is some Gilbert Grape level like movement, physicality. And I was like, oh my God, what's eating Gilbert Grape? That was probably like the first movie he did that I can remember that comes to mind where people were like, holy shit, Leonardo DiCaprio is an amazing actor. And like, it's kind of like ever since he started making movies, whether it's Basketball Diaries or What's Eating Gilbert Grape, even Titanic. I mean, I know that movie gets a lot of hate because it's like kind of like a girl movie. But even that, it was amazing, right? And that's probably what put him on the map with like a broader audience. But I don't think he's ever made a bad. I don't think he's ever been in a movie that was like, oh, that movie's shit.
It's really funny to me because we're like talking about Leonardo DiCaprio as if he's some like unknown, like diamond in the rough actor. And it's like, no, he's like the biggest star in Hollywood.
He's the biggest star in Hollywood. And everyone knows him and loves him. Like, you can't hate. Like, Leonardo DiCaprio is an amazing actor. And he proved it again, I think, in both of these movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Wolf of Wall Street, I would recommend it. It's a time investment for sure. And you're going to see a lot of shocking things that may offend you, or I don't know, maybe you're not sensitive and you're not a snowflake. I saw some things where I was like, oh God, like I was a little like, not offended, but I was like surprised and shocked by. There are some shocking things in this movie. But anyway, I like it. You should definitely watch it.
Yeah.
Aviator.
The Aviator, again, I'm kicking myself in the ass for not having watched it sooner, because it does really tick off all those boxes. You know, I mean, it's obviously it doesn't have a mafia connotation. So there's no organized crime in it. But there actually is an element to that. Mm-hmm. This movie takes place in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. And so there's this beat that goes through the film where Howard Hughes buys up TWA, and TWA is competing with Pan Am. And Pan Am is trying to basically monopolize the market on international travel. Mm-hmm. And they're going out of their way to try to essentially ruin him, using politicians and using sort of
the FBI,
right, just really hammering Howard Hughes, mm-hmm. you know, in the movie. I don't know how true to life it is. I'm assuming it's relatively close, but so there is like that element in it, but it has the same degree of like, there's a certain level of like sorrow to that character as Howard Hughes descends into his own sort of madness and his inability to deal with his own disorder, that I thought was very reminiscent of Raging Bull. Raging Bull is a boxing movie.
Right.
And, you know, it's just it's about a guy who gets pummeled. And I feel like in that sense, they're very similar. The how it rolls out, you know, how the story plays out, the actual outcome of both stories is totally different. But it had like that Raging Bull feel to it. It had like a very similar feel to, Casino, right? Like watching, and she hasn't seen Casino, so I don't want to give any spoilers, but you know, at the I
think I've got the gist.
At the end, the casinos are all sort of falling, right? It's the end of an era. It's one individual person who could not operate outside of the parameters that they designed for themselves, and just sort of like the story of their life within it. And, you know, it was like, damn, it's another good Scorsese movie that I missed when I've seen it. So now I can add it to the rotation.
Yeah. So overall, Scorsese, always a win. Mm-hmm. I think probably one of my favorite Scorsese movies that I can watch over and over again has got to be The Departed.
Yeah.
That's probably still like one of my top ones, which is adapted from a Hong Kong movie. Mm-hmm. I forget what it's called. But anyway, it's adapted from a Hong Kong movie.
The Killer?
No. Let me look it up.
Infernal Affairs.
Infernal Affairs. That's what it is. Oh, gosh. Anyway, that's probably one of my favorites. I think because just all the actors do such a great job. And I think Mark Wahlberg is really good in that movie. So, anyway, I don't think it's going to kick, Wolf of Wall Street isn't going to kick that out of like my top one or two. Mm-hmm. Aviator's still like great, and I will watch it. I'll say for Aviator, for as long and action-packed as Wolf of Wall Street is, I think the Aviator can feel a bit slow in parts. Mm-hmm. There are some like lulls and you're kind of like, oh, okay, what's next? But it's not as long, so you don't have as much to like get through in that. But yeah.
So down the road for you, what you have to look forward to is both Casino and Taxi Driver.
Okay.
Mean Streets.
I don't think I haven't seen Raging Bull either.
So okay, we can add that as well. So, but I think Raging Bull is great, but I think that Taxi Driver and Casino are going to be more essential.
Okay.
Like I'd like you to watch like the some of the other movies that Scorsese has, but they're not. I wouldn't call them as imperative as like Casino and Taxi Driver. Same thing with Mean Streets. I was talking we should watch that, but that's like down the road. Like, that's when we got nothing to do.
Sure.
But those are very important Scorsese films. Casino, I think, is the better of the two overall.
Mm-hmm.
But Taxi Driver is very compelling as well, but for, I think, different reasons.
Okay.
So,
all right. So Aviator's good. You would recommend it?
Yeah, definitely. If you haven't seen The Aviator and you're into DiCaprio, Scorsese, you're into the 20s and 30s, it's expertly acted. It's well directed. It's a compelling story. And like most Scorsese films, it doesn't end on, a happy note where everything wraps up in a perfect bow. So I would definitely check it out.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I don't know what we're going to do next, but we're getting into like the Halloween season.
Yeah.
So if you guys have any recommendations on like horror movies you'd like us to check out or review, or anything spooky.
If we could find like a cool haunted house.
I don't like haunted houses.
Oh, well, I do. So
I get really scared. Like I get too into it. Like I start to believe that the bad things that are happening could be real.
So also, you don't know this.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll cut this out if it doesn't fit our conversation. But I was planning on we have a trip coming up in December.
Okay.
And I was planning on us kind of like just experiencing and reporting to people that watch or listen to.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we do have a trip coming up in December for like the whole month. We're going to be on location somewhere for a while, doing some interesting, cool things for Nate. And yeah, so we'll definitely have to give like updates. Maybe if we have time and interest, we'll even like do a couple more podcasts in December.
Maybe do some like out of the house recording with our video camera.
Yeah, post some playing hooky stuff. Because that is the ultimate playing hooky.
Right.
Like, yeah, you're right. So stay tuned for that. Little surprise coming your guys' way. But hit us up on Twitter or wherever you follow us. iTunes reviews are always helpful. Yeah. They help people find us who you think might also be interested in this type of thing. And we're just two geeks who love each other, that love, taking a break from everyday life and sharing new things with each other.
And one of the things that I could advise you to do is if you listen to this like on iTunes or you listen to this like on your app or something, your Stitcher or whatever, if you see that there's a YouTube video up, watch it on YouTube. Listen to it on YouTube. Only because, YouTube works off of engagement. So if you let this play in the background, but it's on a video player, that actually will help us out a little bit more on YouTube. So not that we have enough people for it to really matter yet at this point. No. But people can be less important. A numeric quantity of people can be less important than overall engagement. If you watch a 45-minute long podcast on YouTube, that's like how many 5-minute long videos you'd have to post for the same amount of people. Do you know what I mean? So there's something to it.
There's some kind of math and science and wizardry involved that I am not informed on. So
we're not big enough.
Listen to that guy. We're not big at all. It's like you and me and like two guys.
Yeah. It's a couple of cool people.
It's like a couple. Like, listen, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, we think you're awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's very nice of you, because really, there's nothing I don't think interesting or compelling about either one of us, and yet you're still listening to us. So maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. I'm not wrong very often. Make it so. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Yeah. Next episode, 2 weeks, we're going to try really hard to stay healthy, not have allergic reactions to things, not get sinus infections, and then we'll be back at you probably with some books or movies or shows or something.
Well, I think we'll try really hard to switch it up this time, because we did 2 back-to-back episodes where it was just movies, and movies are great because they allow me to edit cool stuff into the videos.
They're easy too. They're easy to watch.
Right, they're easy, but I don't want to like devolve. I don't want to like turn into just like a movie review podcast.
Fair enough.
So we're going to work hard to figure out what our next playing hooky is, what I can bring to the table and what she can bring to the table.
We've got some books pending.
Yeah, maybe we do some graphic novels again. Maybe we go back and do some comic book
I agree.
stuff.
Comic book stuff.
Comic book stuff.
Or if you guys have horror movies that you really want us to watch that you love, doesn't matter if we've seen them or not, we'd be happy to review them. So hit us up there and let us, or wherever we're at, and I don't know, words are a thing, and let us know what horror movies you want us to watch.
All right, cool. Well, thank you folks for listening, and be sure to check out our website, utilitymuffinlabs.com, for more podcasty stuff and artwork, and subscribe and leave us reviews and do all that responsible stuff that you have to do so that we can keep doing this. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey folks, this is Rachel from utilitymuffinlabs.com. If you enjoyed the Playing Hooky podcast, think about supporting us. For more podcasts, art, videos, and gaming, go to utilitymuffinlabs.com. Follow our podcast on Twitter, @HookyPodcast, on Instagram and Facebook at our Utility Muffin Labs name, and support us on YouTube at Utility Muffin Labs. Check out our other gaming-related podcasts, 25 Years of Vampire the Masquerade and the Nerd Words podcast. Thank you all for your support. Utility Muffin Labs, consistently rated adequate.